There's new alarm after the National Institutes of Health abruptly announced it will make cuts to biomedical research funding. Attorneys general in 22 states are now suing the Trump administration over the move, but it aims to set a lower cap on payments that universities rely on to cover overhead costs, equipment, maintenance, accounting, personnel. And while Republican senators have largely backed the Trump administration's moves to gut the federal government, what will happen when it hits their state's biggest employer? That is the question in the red state of Alabama, where cuts threaten the University of Alabama at Birmingham, which has received more than $1 billion in NIH funds in recent years. We're seeing similar funding fears in other states like Georgia, Nebraska, Wisconsin. Joining us, John Archibald, columnist at AL.com. NBC's Vaughn Hilliard is on Capitol Hill. Tim Miller's back with us. In studio with me, Basil Smikle, former executive director of the New York State Democratic Party and an MSNBC political analyst. John, let's just sort of set the stage here. How large a chunk is that $1 billion for the University of Alabama, Birmingham? And what could be the impact if it does go away?
Yeah, it's huge. They're talking about $100 million a year, essentially, which is a lot of money in as you said, a deep red state, a very Trump state right here in the Bible Belt that does a really terrible job of taking care of its sick people, with the exception of UAB, perhaps. But it powers the entire economy of the largest metro in the state. And there's been, quite frankly, a lot of silence about it.
Well, both U.S. senators from Alabama, Katie Britt and Tommy Tuberville, I don't have to tell you, are Republicans. So they haven't had anything to say about these NIH cuts?
Katie Britt has hinted that the cuts should be considered carefully, which is, I guess, as good as we can hope for at this point. It was a pretty milquetoast thing, I would say a scaredy cat sort of protest. Tommy Tuberville, who I would point out has received millions of dollars from to leave public institutions, complains that that we can take no more waste. So he is fully on board with the cuts.
So Vaughn, Republican Senator of Maine, Susan Collins, is actually pushing back on this NIH cap on the indirect costs. What's she saying?
Right, and all of this comes, let's be clear, Chris, before Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s confirmation vote actually takes place. We anticipate that happening here in the Senate later on this week, and Susan Collins is a Republican senator who just a few days ago said that she intends to vote for the nomination of Kennedy, yet at the same time over the weekend, learning about the repercussions and the financial consequences of this cut to the indirect costs, she spoke out and said that she called Kennedy directly to bring this up directly with him before that vote actually takes place and before she'll go and put her thumb up or thumb down. And in a statement, she directly responded to these cuts, in which she said in part, quote, "I oppose the poorly conceived directive imposing an arbitrary cap on the indirect costs that are part of NIH grants and negotiated between the grant recipient and NIH. I have heard from the Jackson Laboratory, the University of Maine, Maine Medical Center Research Institute, the University of New England, and MDI Biological Laboratory, among others, that these cuts, which in some cases would apply retroactively to existing grants, would be devastating, stopping vital biomedical research and leading to the loss of jobs." She said in that statement that Kennedy indicated to her that once he is confirmed, he will go and check on that and see if he can correct course.
So, Tim, Susan Collins is a Republican up for re-election in 2026 in a state that Kamala Harris actually won in November. Do you think this particular move could put more Republicans? I'm thinking also North Carolina's Tim Tillis. He's in a tough spot. The New York Times reports that North Carolina researchers were awarded $3.7 billion in NIH grants just last year. Could that get them to move a little bit?
Well, look, I think possibly. I think that there is kind of the substance and political side of this, as there always is. When you have Tillis and Collins, there was just a report out a little bit ago. I saw that Tim Scott, in a private meeting for the NRSC, said that they were going to need to raise about $1 billion for those Maine and North Carolina Senate races. So Collins and Tillis.
Wait, what?
Yeah, that's what Tim Scott said in a recent thing. Yes, the billion for the they're going to be the two biggest Senate races 2026. So, Collins and Tillis can't go so far afield from the party that they feel like it might hurt. If they're going after Trump, it could hurt their ability to get support, financially for their midterm. Who knows? Like, they have a lot of different calculations, I guess is my point. So Tillis is somebody that there was a lot of expectation that he might have bucked the party in various times. We haven't seen that so far. He's been down the line and almost kind of unabashedly down the line on all of Trump's nominees. So, who knows what will actually move them? I do think in this instance, the NIH funding, this gets right into these communities. It gets into red communities. It gets, and the ripple effect, I think, is bigger than Elon Musk and his Doge, teens realize, right? And so I do think once this really hits communities and once we're through all the legal challenges, yes, you might see some of these Republican senators start to move because they're getting pressure from the bottom up. But that's going to take time.
Okay, Basil, look, we talked about the fact that there are already, lawsuits going on for many of these directives. But it was interesting what Dan Pfeiffer, who was an Obama senior advisor, said about this. He said, in every budget battle of the last 30 years, proposing cuts to cancer research and food safety was the moment Republicans lost. Is there an opening here for Democrats?
Well, I think there is. And to Tim's point, I think some of the ire that has been directed at the, quote, elite institutions, the Northeast institutions, is maybe where some of this derives. But the reality is that you have real big institutions in smaller towns, smaller states where everything that needs to happen happens in many ways through that university, the jobs, the economic development, all of that. So when you cut this kind of research, you're not only cutting the opportunity to learn more, be more innovative, have more innovative approaches to various diseases, you also cut an economic lifeline for a lot of these folks. Now, Tom Suozzi made a point about AID that I think is relevant here, which is if you have legitimate concerns about spending, do what everybody else does, bring it to Congress. Let Congress engage in its oversight authority and bring in experts to say we can cut here but not here. But if you do it wholesale, then what you're doing is putting so many of these programs in jeopardy and ultimately costing people lives if they can't actually do the work that they're intended to do.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit, if we can, John, about the ripple effect, because I grew up outside of Cleveland. The Cleveland Clinic, huge employer. It's probably by far the biggest employer in Cleveland for sure. But I know just when family members have been there, you go across the street and you buy your lunch there, you buy your dinner there. People stand at the local hotels because they have somebody who's come in from another state. You know what the ripple effects are. If that starts being felt, are you hearing concerns yet about the ripple effects that might be felt?
Oh, absolutely. Birmingham lost its steel industry years ago, and UAB saved the town and it's the largest employer, not just here, but in the state. And other than UAB, the largest industry is hospitality. So restaurants and bars and hotels are freaking out, but there's also all the people that work with them and that work with biomedical research and tech that are involved in that as well. And Birmingham is a town that's lost almost 20% of its population since the turn of the century, and it is. And people in the outlying areas are affected just as much as the city. So it's a very vulnerable place right now, and this is a death blow.
And you're a professor, so you're around college students every day. There was a big article in one of the papers today about students who are studying to be foreign service. But think about, in a case like this, the brain drain that could happen for people who knows who the next person is who is going to find a treatment or a cure. And the reality, a lot of these kids are going to be graduating from college with big debt.
Right. That's
And
right.
they want to know, where am I going to be able to get a job?
That's right. So there is that immediate concern, and then there's the chilling effect going into that, because if you're in a small town or a state where the university is the job, right? Are you going to be interested in trying to get a job that may not exist at that university? Stay home. So you may leave your city, you may leave your state. So there's brain drain, not just from the university writ large, but from cities and states, because those jobs are no longer there. And just a little bit of history. In 1958, Eisenhower signed the National Defense Education Act. The point of that was to say that we have these concerns about our competition abroad. Maybe we should put more money into universities to train students to be able to get jobs so that they could kind of advance the interests of America. Where is that today? Because what we're hearing is a reduction of that, is the taking away of dollars so that it won't have that impact. It won't push people into jobs to make America more competitive. Quite the opposite.